60 Minutes with Angela starts right now.
Now, listen to this.
If we deprive citizens of the right to protest and to do so vigorously and abuse public officers, you destroy the entire basis of democracy.
Well, hello and welcome. This is 60 Minutes with me, Angela Ajitumobi. Thank you for joining me on the program today. Now, my host today is a widely published author, keenly sought after for his advice to major international bodies, the United Nations, the African Union, the Economic Commission for Africa, Economic Commission of West African States, ECOWAS, and the World Economic Forum. In 24 hours or so, he will cease to be chairman of Nigeria's National Human Rights Commission, a post he has held since December 8, 2011. He holds a PhD in law from the London School of Economics and Political Science, that's in the United Kingdom. He's a board member of the Human Rights Advisory Council of the Carnegie Council on Ethics and International Affairs, board member, International Refugee Rights Initiative, and board member for the Fund for Global Human Rights. He's also a member of the Executive Committee of Nigeria's Bar Association, MBA, and is the founder of the Public Interest and Development Law section of the NBA. So, join me after the break as I count down 60 minutes with Professor of Law, CHIDI Odinkalu. Welcome back. Welcome, Professor Odinkalu. It's great to have you back on the program.
Thanks a lot, Angel, and compliments of the season.
Same to you. So I thought we should start with an overview of our Human Rights Commission or mission record in 2015. Well, starting from 2011 when you were appointed as the chairman of the commission. How far do you think Nigeria has gone in recognizing these human rights and possibly expanding them? We've seen the United States, for instance, include gay rights as human rights. Do you think we'll ever get to that point where we will expand our human rights to that extent?
Well, thank you. If you ask me to use one word, I would probably say fair. If you ask me to use two words, I would say not enough.
Not enough.
We've got serious challenges. But I always begin from recognizing that we've made some progress. 35 years ago, we were under military rule.
Yes.
And the prospect of having a country ruled by civilians for 16, 17 years was not exactly very promising. And civilian rule, I think, the right of citizens to decide who rules them is second, perhaps only to the right to life in terms of its significance for the protection of human rights. So from that point of view, I think we've made tremendous progress. That said, I think we've also got serious challenges. We've got serious challenges with recognizing the rights that matter and protecting them. We've got serious challenges with violence across the country. It's not just in the northeast, it's around the country. It's in the northwest, it's in the north central, it's in the south, southeast, southwest, everywhere. It's in the bedroom, it's in the streets. We are currently in the period of 16 days of activism on violence against women. And violence against women is one of the most serious forms of violence in the country. There are too many walking wounded. Most women who experience violence, whether physical violence or sexual violence or emotional violence, do not get remedies.
Yes.
And will not indeed be trusted by the security agencies for that purpose. We've also got a terrible problem of violence against children. 25% of our kids will experience sexual violence before they turn 18.
Yes.
That's female, girl children. And 10% of male children will experience sexual violence before they turn 18. And that's really awful. Now, our judicial process also does not always guarantee exit from courts, and access to courts is also difficult.
I like the way you put that, exit from the courts, because you'll be there forever in the courts.
Absolutely, yes. You know, if you're a widow trying to claim the assets of your husband, the late husband, you can be locked up as Mrs. Mojek, who was locked up for 31 years. Or in the more recent case before the Supreme Court, we took 34 years, and nobody wants to die and have their widow spend 34 years in litigation. And so I do admit we've got serious problems. We've also got serious problems of discrimination, of national integration, of mutual suspicions, pejoratives traded, suspicions against people based on their origins.
Yes.
And these are not going to go away. And given this, we've got life and death issues, maternal mortality and all of that. I don't want to minimize the challenge of protecting everybody.
Yes.
But I also do think that the issue of the human rights of people of alternative sexuality has got to be seen in the context of these huge challenges we've got. And many people may develop different priorities as to those. The one thing I draw the line at is persecution of anybody because we don't accept who they are. That's not within our rights, and nobody should be persecuted for being different.
And so, you know, when I said to my son, I was speaking with the chairman of the National Human Rights Commission, he was shocked that we had such a commission. You know, do you get that vibe that the ordinary Nigerian gets, that this commission is just one of those things that government sets up but never intend to implement any advice that comes from it?
Yes, I do. I've received it very often. I also think it's not just the average Nigerian. I quite frankly met staff who did not believe that the work of the National Human Rights Commission was to be taken seriously.
And they worked with you?
And they worked with me. In the course of the 4 years, I'd like to hope I've changed some. I've persuaded some to a different point of view. But quite honestly, that was what I met, that people genuinely did believe, people who were the staff of the commission, these are not, you know, these are not people on the streets, genuinely believed that they were there just to collect money, alleviate their personal poverties, but be an irrelevance to Nigerians.
And I understand also that even in the police college, human rights wasn't a topic taught at the police college. A lot of the policemen on the streets have no clue about these rights. Would that assessment be true?
Actually, they do teach human rights in the police college now. They also deal with it in Command and Staff College in the military and at the War College. They also do the same at the SSS College.
Right.
Now, the problem, however, is you don't do policing or security agency work in the colleges or the staff colleges. You do it on the streets. And much of what you do is defined by two things: doctrine and institutional traditions. And the teachings you receive in the college or the curriculum in the college quite often bear no relationship to the reality of command and control and structure and doctrine and tradition. And with the police in particular, more than any other institution in Nigeria, that's very much so. It doesn't depend on who the Inspector General of Police is for the most part. And there are two reasons for that. One is the fact that the police is the oldest institution in Nigeria and also the biggest employer of labor. By the time we were independent in 1960, we'd already had a police institution for 100 years. It started in 1861 here in Lagos, and so the traditions were already very firm, and those traditions were an oppressive institution in the hands of white people against black people. Those traditions have been handed down successively and were then deepened by military rule. So if you look at 154 years of the existence of the police force, we've had about 130 years of its existence under dictatorship, either colonial dictatorship or military dictatorship. That does not give you the best traditions for dealing with a free people. The second is that the police is actually, because of these two things, under the thumb of the president. As a matter of law and the constitution, the operational chief of the police in Nigeria is not the Inspector General of Police, it is the president. And no matter how benevolent the president is, the court of the president would always want to be able to retain the possibility of using the police for the kinds of things that please them or they think would please their master. These are the two reasons why, on a day-to-day basis, the police continues to be problematic.
You know, when you say, you know, please the master, we're talking about second guessing here, and some people would say, well, no one forces the head of the police to second guess the president. If he chooses to do so, should we blame cultural reasons or precedents for the fact that he can't stand up to the president?
In the past 16 years, we've had, 5, 6 inspectors general of police thereabouts. And I remember in the lifetime of President Obasanjo,
yes,
going to an inspector general of police with a colleague who is still alive and works with a major foundation today. We presented a proposal to him for us to go to President Obasanjo to work with the government at the time, the administration, to create a legislative framework for the autonomy of the Office of the Inspector General of Police with a tenure. So the proposal was you give the Inspector General of Police a tenure for 3 years,
right,
which could or could not be renewed, or 2 years as the case may be. And I remember we sat down in front of him and presented the case, and we wanted buy-in, and then we'd get, the Police Service Commission was inclined to accept as well. And he said, young man, this thing was like this before I came in. I want to leave it like this when I'm going. That was the end of it. His reasoning was if he went to discuss this or lead it, he'll be seen as canvassing for extension of his tenure,
yes,
which doesn't make sense. But because we don't have an independent police service or police force, as the case may be,
yes,
we will continue to have people who feel the need to second guess the boss or the court of the president, because every presidency has a court,
yes,
whether you like it or not. People will second guess the court of the president for what will make them secure in their position and will not interfere with their retirement plans.
Let's talk about hate speech. I'm quoting you now. It's unlawful to advocate for mass removal of Nigerians from parts of their own country. That is hate speech. Chief Falaye's abduction is a crime, but to make that the basis of a campaign against a race is hate speech. End of quote. So what about the refusal to allow Nigerians in their own country to be able to buy or own land in other parts of the country? You know, you're a southerner, you want to buy land in Anambra State, you can't own land. Is that not some form of hate speech as well?
I think, which is why, when you asked me about the challenges at the top of the program, I did say that one of our biggest problems was discrimination and integration. I personally think that's probably our biggest underlying issue, and that a lot of these other things that you've got are symptoms of that underlying issue. And Nigerians are pretty much fair game in our own country. And in this country, the only minority you have is the Nigerian. If you're looking for a Yoruba, Igbo, a Fulani, a Beram, an Ibibio, a Fake,
you'll find them.
You'll find all of them, and they're very proud people. But if you're looking for a person who is happy to be called a Nigerian, you're going to struggle to have one person raise their hands. And the place where you find Nigerians increasingly is at border crossings internationally. People who wield green passports and
yes,
are either being deported or being expelled, or trying to do shopping in Dubai. Now that is problematic, because this was not always the country we knew. You ask yourself, why is that so? Are Nigerians trying to trek across the Sahara to get to cross into Europe via the Mediterranean or the Gulf or the Strait of Gibraltar? Now, why is that so? That is the question we've got to ask ourselves. Now, wherever you look in this country, we've got problems of identity at the moment. Whether you're talking about Boko Haram and the Caliphate, or whether you're talking about Shekau and the Caliphate, or Nnamdi Kanu and Biafra, or Egbesu Boys and Mujahid, or the Ambatse in the Middle Belt, or the Hizbah, or there are militias everywhere. The country is run by militias, and increasingly, the only people that politicians and government want to listen to are people who are carrying guns or threatening to carry guns, right?
So when we said at the time that amnesty was offered to militants, that it would seem that the only way to get the government to the table to dialogue is to carry arms against it.
And there's something fundamentally wrong with that. Now, why is that so? The man who is now Senator Orji was governor of Abia State 5 years ago. And Abia State used to be part of Imo State. They were divided up in 1991. And he expelled from Abia State all the teachers and public servants of Imo State origins who had built up service records in Abia State, lived their lives in Abia State, and had their pension rights in Abia State. Not one person was willing to say anything.
Why not?
In Lagos State, we had the incident of expulsion of so-called vagrants who were of Igbo origins. And to his credit, Governor Fashola said, in hindsight, he could have done it differently.
Yes.
That is an act of courage, and that I respect. tremendously. Governor Peter Obi did the same thing from Anambra State to Ebonyi State.
And these are all Igbo states, you know,
Thank you
for
very
want of a better word to describe.
All in the southeast.
Yes.
Right? Now, if you are from some parts of Nigeria, you can buy land in some other parts of Nigeria, and people get stuck in these things. And yet they forget this is a country. And in a country, you can go from Azare to Zumunta. Yes? You can go from A to Z.
Yes.
You can go from Calabar to wherever you want in Maiduguri. Those are probably the two farthest distances in the country. Now, that is why it is a country. It's a common customs union. It's a territory of free movement of persons and factor mobility. But we've failed to invest in that because it pleases our politicians to divide us up, to carve us up along lines of identity. And yet, the poor person in Maiduguri is much closer to the poor person in Owerri.
Poverty binds them together.
Poverty, impoverishment binds us together. Just as the elites are also bound together by their mutual interest in the exploitation of the rich resources of our country. And so when you look at the list of who holds oil blocks in the South-South,
yes,
it does not have respect for ethnic origins. There are northerners, there are southerners, there are easterners, there are westerners, there are Muslims, there are Christians. Yes. And you know what? They also intermarry. Yes. And when they intermarry, they don't intermarry based on their villages.
Yes.
The northerners will marry the southerners. The easterners will marry the westerners. And when you look at social mobility and political mobility in Nigeria, most of the most formidable people in Nigeria have married across ethnic lines.
Yes.
But we don't want to project these positive stories.
Why not?
Because it does not please us for purposes of political competition. Lagos State has elected people who are not from Lagos State. Lateef Jakonde happily advertises the fact that his ancestry is in Omuara. Omuara is Kwara State. Kwara State is part of northern Nigeria.
He's the only one who admits it. Not
Yes.
many others will admit.
Now, Sabo Bakinzuwo, who was elected governor of Kano State,
Yes.
is Nupe, or was Nupe, from Niger State. And these are people who moved, integrated with their host communities, and over time became members of the host communities.
Yes.
In Ibadan, wherever you come from, if you integrate into Ibadan, you could quite easily become Olubadan, as long as you're in line of the high chieftaincy and you become the last man standing.
Yes.
And you are integrated, you have the right names, and nobody worries where you come from. Olisa Chukura, who came from Asaba,
yes,
was an Ibadan high chief. He lived in Bodija. He died in Bodija all his life. He lived in Bodija all his life. That's where he died. Now, Nigerians have integrated. Nigerians have intermarried. Kids have gone to do youth service and not gone back to where they came from. I know in parts of Imo State, where the only hospitals are established by people from Ondo State who went on youth service, 25 years later are married, speak the language, I have children whose heritage is common to the southwest and southeast, and are not going anywhere. You find that in the Delta, you find that in Maiduguri, you find that in Damaturu, you find that in Kano, you find that in Jos. But we don't want to tell these stories because when you do, people will say, well, you can't use that to win elections. As if that's the only thing that matters. And even here,
yes,
in Lagos, one of the biggest lawyers here is who? Femi Falana. Anybody who knows Yoruba language will know that Ifa Lana is not from Lagos. And it doesn't take you time to understand, just if you know Yoruba, if you studied a bit of Yoruba cosmology,
yes,
you will know where Ifalana comes from. Yeah. Now, this is the point, and I could say that for Ifayoshe and Ifayemi, right? Now, this is really the point, that we have a rich country of tremendous positives, and people have either our leaders in particular have either got to believe in this country or they don't. And the thing is, Nigeria's people believe in the country. Nigeria's people want to live together. So in all likelihood, if you're interested in eating proteins, yes, the most likely thing is that you get your proteins from a Fulani man. Why? Because the cattle herders provide our proteins, yes, through the cattle that they herd, through the goats that they give us, and yet Alausa was the first cattle market in Lagos before they moved. Alausa is an Igbo word. Just to give, that is Hausa land. That's Alausa. Now, Nigeria has been coming together in the lives of the people. your corner shop will probably be run by somebody from across the River Niger. Now, all of that, Nigerians have economic relations that bind us together, social relations that bind us together. Our leaders will have to decide for themselves whether they want to believe as much in the country as Nigerians do.
Join us again after the break.
It is difficult to respond to that question.
Angela, that's a great question.
Great question, Angela.
Angela, that is a very great question.
That's a great question.
Okay, that's a great question.
Yeah, very good question.
That's a good question.
This is an interesting question you put.
60 Minutes with Angela. Again, answers to every question you always wanted to ask.
So what is 60 Minutes with Angela all about? It's not an interview. I like to think it's a conversation between two people making the news, people who are in the news, and those who become the news. And the whole idea is to inform, to educate, or to clarify, as the case may be. It is an art getting people to answer the questions that everyone is thinking in their minds. And that's what we try to do on 60 Minutes with Angela. I ask all the questions that everyone's thinking about and no one wants to voice. All the questions you always wanted to ask, you get those answers on 60 Minutes with Angela. Every week on this station, 60 Minutes with Angela, getting answers to every question you always wanted to ask. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, it's 60 Minutes with me, Angela Ajitumobi. On my hot seat today, Chidi Odinkalu, Professor of Law and the outgoing chairman of the Nigerian Human Rights Commission. So, are you one of those who thinks we should do away with the principle of federal character in the Constitution? Perhaps that deepens this ethnicity a lot more than it ought to.
No. I believe in federal character quite firmly. But I think we've got to refine how we operate it. I think there are issues of historic equity and inequity that need to be addressed in the way we run our country, and will always be there, or will always have to be addressed. But how we operate it is an issue. I'll give you one example. I think federal character should not just be about ethnicity and tribe. I think federal character should also engage the issue of gender.
Right.
Because women are part of the federation. Now, but you see, we valorize ethnicity over every other thing else.
Yes.
So it's like Nigeria, it has become a collection of Bantustans comprised of different ethnic groups or tribal groups, and those are the federating units, but they have never been. You know, ethnicities have never been federating units, and that's why we've always had problems with the map of states, and that's to the point where we've got the map of states now that is a bit difficult to manage, and our overheads have outrun our capacity to service the country. So I do think, for instance, therefore, that gender, sex discrimination should be reflected in our ethnicity. A historic misogyny of our society should be part of what we seek to cure through federal character. I also do think that the allocation of quotas, which is really what is done in the Federal Character Commission Act, undermines the spirit of federal character.
In what way?
Because you have to do two things. One, you've got to address the need for integration. And you cannot address integration if you are doing quotas. And so you see, you go to Plateau State. Plateau State does have about 56 ethnic and national groups, all of which claim to be indigenous to Plateau State.
Yes.
Now, when you begin to allocate quotas, people will say you are not as indigenous as we are. You are not as Plateau as we are.
Yes.
And so, if you appoint a person who is historically Fulani from Plateau State, or notwithstanding the fact that the person has got a history going back immemorial times to Plateau, you've got a problem. And so there's got to be a way to address that. I also think, for instance, that Section 147 of the Constitution, which obliges the president to appoint at least one minister from each state, should be abolished. Because ministers don't have constituencies. Ministers don't represent anybody. Ministers have legitimacy that owes to the electoral mandate of the president.
Right.
Therefore, the president should be happy and willing to determine the number of people that he or she wants to work with. It can be 2, it can be 50. But depending on what the political program is. But what does happen, of course, is when you have the situation of, or the idea of a minister representing a state, politicians at the state level then start fretting that a minister is going to be bigger than them. You have political conflicts. The ministers start becoming, political gods in their respective states.
Flexing their muscles.
Flexing muscles. And so the job of service delivery, of delivering on the political commitment that their principal made in order to get elected, is forgotten. And I think we've got to dispense with that. So there are elements of our federal character that do give me worry. But I do think that we can rebalance it through differentials, variable geometry in investment in human capital. For instance, you look at the situation in the northeast of Nigeria, and you see we've got a serious crisis. With what Boko Haram has done, that region has been sent back into the dark ages in terms of education and in terms of human development. And it seems to me, therefore, that federal character would mandate us to up and rebalance investments in that part of the country in order to drag up the statistics,
bring them back
for human development.
Yes.
That is how I see federal character working, so that we make sure no kid is left behind in the northeast in relation to education, no mother is left behind in relation to access to healthcare, no community is left behind in relation to being able to access markets, roads, to be able to bring their goods to the markets. Now, that for me is federal character. And if we could rebalance that way in terms of investments over time, we can have a sunset for some aspects of federal character, which actually is not happening at the moment.
And where do you stand on this matter of self-determination? I wanted you first, as a lawyer, to tell us, does it not amount to treason for anyone to say they don't want to be a part of Nigeria again? Or do they have a right to say that they don't want to be a part of Nigeria?
As a general principle, my view is that self-determination has got to be exercised in a manner compatible with the sovereign existence of the country.
What do you mean by that?
To begin with, anybody can say they don't want to belong to Nigeria. But taking steps of such a manner so that people don't understand me, I said to begin with.
Yes.
Because that's free expression. I don't want to marry. So that's not a problem. It only becomes an if you begin to take steps to, in a way that means force, levying force or arms in order to bring about that desire, or recruit people, establish militias. Now that becomes another issue. At that point, I think the line is crossed from free expression to treason.
Right.
I think Nigeria is inequitable. Anybody can say it. Nigeria, and it is actually, Nigeria, or at least is run inequitably. So, pretty much every geopolitical zone can make that case. Now, Nigeria, because of inequity, I don't want to belong to Nigeria. Up to that point, it's free expression. Now, because I don't want to belong to Nigeria, or I say I don't want to belong to Nigeria, I can now begin to collect arms, organize kids, indoctrinate. At that point, you've crossed the line.
Would I be crossing the line, tearing my passport, for instance?
In my view, if people choose to tear their passports, that's free expression. It is their problem. Now, but you cannot, in my view, and on my reading of the law as it is, begin to take steps beyond just voicing it, to incite hatred, bring a contempt on other populations because you don't like them, or that kind of thing. At that point, for me, a line is crossed.
Right.
And at that point, the country has got to exercise responsibility. Because in my view, there is one thing a country cannot negotiate: the equal protection of everybody who lives within its territory.
Lives.
Absolutely. That means brown or white, tall or short, male or female, north or south, whatever race they are, you must not cross that line. If it's crossed, the country has got to bring the fullest force of its authority on you to bring it on it.
In other words, if you want self-determination, there is a process.
You do it peacefully. And you see, self-determination is also not an all or nothing proposition. Self-determination is also about how you rebalance inequities in a country, how you address them. I cannot claim self-determination to the exclusion of any other person.
Yes.
So if I claim
because
to be
every region has,
an
issues.
equal claim to self-determination.
Yes.
And so if I claim my own self-determination and the other region claims its own self-determination and another region claims its own self-determination and all of us want to do it by force, there will be no country left.
Will there be a point where the state can also cross the line? You've talked about the citizen crossing the line in pushing for self-determination or agitating for it. Is there a point where the state can also cross the line in stopping me from expressing that I want self-determination?
A democracy is a very messy thing. Things happen in a democracy that you can't always control. I personally err on the side of allowing citizens to express themselves, to vent, particularly in a country in which leadership has not always been really nice to the citizens. So I err on the side of allowing citizens to vent, as long as it does not invite or involve incitement to hatred of other people based on their race, on their tribe, on their sex, on things they can't change. You can't change the or their faith. We have difference and diversity is a resource that a country should optimize and harness. But that said, and because of that, I think a country has got to be careful in how it manages dissent, in how it manages expression that it may not like or some people may not like. But my inclination is when that happens, particularly when people incite hatred, take them to court and make the point this should not be done. If there is also public protest, keep it on the tarmac. If people begin to attack others because they think those people are different, now you've got to bring that to a close. You've got to shut that down very firmly. Now, sometimes that involves the use of force, and it's the use of force, actually, where gray areas begin to occur. How do you use force in a manner compatible with democratic society? And there are rules that govern that. In my time at the National Human Rights Commission, I've seen our security forces, in my view, cross the line on more than one occasion. And I do think that that is where we've got to exercise greater vigilance to make sure that our security agencies, on the one hand, protect the sovereign integrity of Nigeria, to defend the equal opportunity of every Nigerian and equal integrity of every person who lives in Nigeria, while at the same time ensuring that democracy is sustained and dissent and diversity is sustained. It's not an easy balance, and I do sympathize sometimes also with the challenges they face.
And have you been following the debate on this new, what they call a social media bill for an act to prohibit frivolous petitions and other matters connected therewith?
I read that yesterday. I read the bill.
There are two fines for text messages, tweets, WhatsApp, Instagram. I understand it's a fine of 2 million naira and or jail term of 2 years. If it's a false newspaper, radio, TV statement, it's a 4 million naira fine and or jail term of 2 years. Is that an infringement on our human rights here?
Let me say this. I think we've got to back up a bit. We've got a very fragile country. And one of the easiest ways these days to inflame passions is electronic media.
Yes.
And you can incite people to hatred by just sending out a false message, and then it goes viral. And those who trying to beat it back will always be in arrears of the movement of that message. So let's not underestimate the challenge. Yes. The question is, how do you address it? And is this the best way to address it? And in my view, I don't think this is the best way to address it. I think the bill is frivolous. Having recognized that we've got a problem, I think the bill is frivolous. I think that this kind of bill, if it were to become law, will probably be the most toxic danger that the country has faced in a long while. And I think really that it's misguided and they should dispense with it. Much of the existing law actually covers it. I thought
there would be laws in existence to deal with things like defamation, like libel, if you feel offended.
Incitement. All of those already exist. All you've got to do is adapt those laws to the new digital environment. That requires not a new set of legislation, but a different mode of law enforcement.
Right.
Law enforcement that is capable, that is digitally enabled, and is able to track those kinds of material. And at the moment, we don't have the digital ability, apart from the DSS, which in many places does have some of that capability.
Yes.
We don't have that capability in the police force. Now they're trying to set up a digital lab at the FCID in Abuja.
Yes.
But it's still going to take some time to train up the lots of people we need, and then to get the kind of capability we need to track these things. But without that, really, this is all not quite right.
But I mean, we recognize that there is a problem. We've seen already charges brought against some bloggers for carrying false information, some even amounting to blackmail. So there are laws in place for dealing with things like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You see, because also, the media has become atomized with the digital environment. Anybody can publish.
Yes.
If you grow enough metrics on your Twitter handle, on your Facebook page, you become a media sensation.
Yes.
You have your own cocoon and your echo chamber, and you can say whatever you want. Now, and politicians, I think, and powerful people also recognize this does pose a problem. In the past, you could shut down one newspaper or shut down one radio station or take over a few radio stations and you had a coup.
Yes.
Now you can't do that anymore. And I do think that that is positive. That's very positive. And we should continue to encourage diversity. The fact that people abuse those of us who have public office responsibility, I think is right. I think citizens should abuse public offices, particularly, and should exercise the right vigorously. If you have a thin skin and you don't want to be abused, get out of office.
Don't go into public office.
Don't go into public life at all. But do I feel diminished because a citizen calls me a bastard? No. Do I think they have a right to do it? Absolutely. Will I protect their right with my blood? Because if we deprive citizens of the right to protest and to do so vigorously and abuse public officers, you destroy the entire basis of democracy. And, you know, people have paid with their lives to give us this democracy, elective office, elective governance. It may not be the best. It's imperfect. It's got lots of problems. But you know what? It's our best chance to try and build a country, and we've got to make it work.
Join us again after the break.
It is difficult to respond to that question.
Angela, that's a great question.
Great question, Angela. Angela, that is a very great question.
That's a great question.
Okay, that's a great question.
Yeah, very good question.
That's a good question.
This is an interesting question you put.
60 Minutes with Angela. Again, answers to every question you always wanted to ask.
So what is 60 Minutes with Angela all about? It's not an interview. I like to think it's a conversation between two people making the news, people who are in the news, and those who become the news. And the whole idea is to inform, to educate, or to clarify, as the case may be. It is an art getting people to answer the questions that everyone is thinking in their minds. And that's what we try to do on 60 Minutes with Angela. I ask all the questions that everyone's thinking about and no one wants to voice. All the questions you always wanted to ask, you get those answers on 60 Minutes with Angela. Every week on this station, 60 Minutes with Angela, getting answers to every question you always wanted to ask. Welcome back. My concluding moments now with Professor CHIDI ODINKALU, Chairman of the Nigerian Human Rights Commission. Now, Professor, I know that you had inaugurated a committee recently to review all the laws that contravene the provisions of human rights in Nigeria. How can that be possible? How can any laws exist that contravene human rights? You know, are laws made in isolation?
Indeed they are. Human rights only became part of Nigerian law under the 1960 Constitution after the Willing Commission, which recommended that they be adopted. And before that, most of our laws were made well before 1960. Criminal Code, Penal Code, which are the defining laws, public order. Some of these have been reenacted. But, you know, and then you had the military rule era. You know, when you add colonial era plus military era, you've got the vast body of our laws made. And so by 1999, when we came into civilian rule, most of the laws we had were in arrears of the constitutional standards. And the challenge really is trying to upgrade those standards. Some of them, obviously, we can't upgrade without constitutional amendment. Take, for instance, Section 43 of the Constitution. Everybody has a right to property, except, and that includes land, except if you are from the Niger Delta, in which case all your lands belong to the state because there is oil underneath your land. Now that's a problem. And the expropriation of communities that have mineral resources under their lands needs to be addressed. That you cannot do by this process. You've got to do it via a process that involves dialogue across the country to find the most equitable way to harness natural resources for the benefit of all Nigerians, while at the same time enabling the communities to maintain livelihoods. So that's going to take some time. But there are issues like the laws of sexual violence. The fact that the crime of raping a child is less than the crime of raping an adult.
How can that be?
Thank you. Now, And that came from the Victorian era, of course, because our criminal laws were made in the Victorian era. There are other crimes. Some of these we cannot do within this context, but states have got to look at them. The fact that Nigerians, the criminal code prohibits burying human beings in houses, but people are still buried in houses right across the country, or in lived territories.
I mean, that's in the criminal code?
Yeah, of course it is. Or prohibitions of witchcraft. And, the Witchcraft Act, of course, used to be part of our laws. And basically, witchcraft was a way of worship that white people did not like. Okay?
Yes.
So if you were an Ifa priest, you were practicing witchcraft, and you could be prosecuted for that. And indeed, today, anybody who doesn't can you doing Ifa worship cannot still prosecute you.
Yes.
So there are some of these things we've got to eliminate, because Nigeria is way beyond those things, and we're more enlightened than that. And that's really what the process is supposed to do. I don't think anybody can complete it all, but at least we can make a contribution to that process.
Yes. And how will it work? When you recognize these things, is it off to the National Assembly?
It's tabled, hopefully, through the Office of the Attorney General, who would then send it to Cabinet and then to National Assembly.
Okay. Also, if I agree with you, as you've said, that after the right to life, the next biggest right is the right for people to choose who rules them. That's you I'm quoting now. Question is, can we really say we have exercised that right, given the way these people emerge within the political parties?
We've made progress compared to where we were in 2003 and 2007. In 2007, I think in all through Nigeria, you've got about 1,496 offices for which you have elections.
Elections, yes.
Out of that, in 2007, 1,299, that's about 86%, ended up in court, were decided by courts. And that was because there was no election. The people's right to choose their government had been expropriated by lawyers and the judiciary, and the lawyers and the judiciary were making a lot of money out of that. Now, by 2011, that proportion of cases being decided by judges had fallen to 51.6%. This year, it has further fallen to just under 43%.
Not many people are going to the tribunals.
Thank you. So, compared to 2007, the number of cases being decided by the courts and tribunals has fallen by nearly 50%. That is a measure of progress in my view. It doesn't say our system is yet perfect or close to perfect, but it says that the level of confidence in its outcomes, have increased.
Yes.
Now, that is all you can do. Keep incrementally perfecting the imperfections. And as long as we're on that course, we should be okay.
What about independent candidacy? Will there ever be a time, you think?
I thought actually the last constitutional amendment nearly pretty much carried that, but we couldn't get that out of the political process.
Yes.
The African Court on Human and People's Rights, by the way, and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights is part of Nigeria's law. The African Court on Human and People's Rights 2 years ago, in a case from Tanzania, ruled that the exclusion of independent candidates from any constitution is incompatible with the African Charter. Now, that is applicable to all countries party to the African Charter, including Nigeria. And it's up to Nigeria, actually, to work hard now to bring our laws in line with that standard of conduct. And I'd like to think that would invariably happen. It's a matter of time, because in this country, increasingly, people don't worry themselves so much about party anymore.
Yes.
They worry about candidates.
Yes.
If the candidate is good,
The
irrespective
individual
of the platform,
yes,
they will go for, most people will go for the, and people know who is a good candidate and who is not a good candidate. Or if you give them two candidates, they know who is better than the other. That's really the best you can get.
And I want to take you now to Kogi State, the unfortunate death of Abubakar Audu on the eve of that election. Just to look at how did the law play out there? You think the law was right to not allow his deputy to become the candidate? Some say until the oath of office is taken, they are only elects, not actually substantive.
To be perfectly honest, I have views on that, fairly strong views, but the matter is in court, and I'll respect the prerogative of the courts to decide what's been submitted to them.
And so if you were called upon today to set an agenda for President Muhammadu Buhari going forward into 2016, based on what you know about our human rights records in the last 4 years and as you leave office, what would be your recommendations?
The biggest challenge we've got is national integration and discrimination. Violence is related to that, but it's
an offshoot
of that. And as far as I'm concerned, any president in Nigeria, irrespective of party, irrespective of where they come from, who does not send out the right signals on national integration and belonging loses me. That really is, for me, agenda number 1, agenda number 2, agenda number 3. And that integration and national coexistence message must come with and be complemented by a very strong commitment to investment in education across the board. Because with education comes mobility, comes dignity, comes enlightenment, it comes the possibility of improvement, of swift transition from one status to another.
Yes.
Now, it's part of our crisis of national coexistence comes from the fact that we have grossly underinvested in education, we've politicized education, we've allowed politicians to begin to put their thugs into teaching positions, and the standards, regulatory standards in education are no longer being respected. And we've got to return dignity to teachers, to education, and make sure that that becomes the basis of our drive for national coexistence and therefore, as far as I'm concerned, education has got to be part of our very high national security architecture.
So when the United Nations is recommending 26% to be spent on education, you totally agree? I
completely agree. I also think it's more than just the percentages. There is a flaw, for instance, in our education, in the architecture for educational policy system and the infrastructure. Most of the money that goes to education is spent on overheads because education has got the most parastatals of any department in the Nigerian state. That's not on, because what it means is it's not going to frontline service delivery or to growing teacher education or curriculum development, is going to pay salaries. And the gearing of frontline service providers to managers and support staff is not right. In many cases, support staff in the educational sector are more than the frontline teachers, service delivery people by 2 to 1.
By 2 to 1?
Yeah.
Whereas the teachers should be more.
It should be the other way around. Why? Because our jobs strategy is based on absorbing people into a bloated public sector. And if you talked about right-sizing the public sector, it becomes a political issue because people are thinking, oh, people from that part are going to lose jobs and people from that part are going to keep their jobs.
Yes.
Now, that is really why we are not making progress in this. And somebody has really got to simply cut to the chase and do something surgical about this, even if it's at the cost of not winning the next election.
Well, as you leave office as chairman of the National Human Rights Commission, happily you say, if your term is renewed, what happens? You won't take up the option?
I think it's important that we learn to move on in Nigeria, move on with a smile on our faces. Accept that the good Lord made us all to be dispensable, and that the most indispensable people in the world are found in cemeteries. Because of that, we've got to have the humility to accept that the biggest thing a country offers its people is citizenship and secure existence as a citizen. Public service is a privilege. I also do think, and I've had the most remarkable privilege. Nigerians have been very kind to me in the National Human Rights Commission. But I do think we've got to grow the possibility of happy transition. And so that people don't believe that it is their right to ride in convoys and be followed by police officers and live a life paid for by taxpayers and that kind of thing. Happily, my position has been part-time. I've not had an official car. I've not had an official...
No perks of office.
I don't have a severance package. That, in my view, is what public service is about. You know, my parents are public servants. They were teachers, and they've been teachers all their lives. The greatest public servants are teachers. And if we want to do anything, let's stop wasting money on these high offices of state. And citizenship is huge public service. You know, I look forward to becoming a citizen, an honorary citizen, be able to lend my little energies to some things. I do have some basic passions. As I've made clear here, education is a basic passion. Violence against women, for me, is a passion, the issue of violence in Nigeria. Climate change and its consequences for the country is another passion. And those are the 3 things over the next period of my life, over the next, whatever God gives me, I want to devote time to.
Thank you very much, Professor. Every time I speak with you, it's a pleasure.
Same here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for this week. I'm Angela Ajitumobi. Thank you for watching.